Happy Friday, everyone, and another big thank you for joining us in, I'm guessing, what might be your lunch hour for many of you. We've got a very exciting, fun-packed and fact-packed 45 minutes. We're discussing customer-centric Agile, and we've got a couple of really cool guests that are going to join us, and I'll introduce you to those in a sec. But just to say, as with the other sessions that we've had, if you guys have any questions at all, if you put them into the chat, I will do my best to keep an eye on those messages as they come in, and we'll answer all the questions that you guys send us. We can go in lots of different directions. But if the questions are quiet, we've got a series of questions which hopefully will give you guys a really good round view of what we mean by customer-centric Agile and the sort of fun that you guys can have adopting it. So let's get stuck in. It's not in any particular order. In fact, I'll do it in the order of on my screen. So I'll introduce you to Chris Brain first of all. Digital District. It's got background, recent background or current background in public sector and a lot of user research. But Chris, that intro probably hasn't done you justice in terms of, what's your kind of experience with customer-centric Agile and what's your background?
Yeah, thanks, John. I was a civil servant for 15 years prior to moving over to the dark side in contracting and consultancy. As a civil servant, I worked in customer-centric Agile teams at the Department for Education and also at the Valuation Office Agency. And since then, I've worked across government in a range of organisations, including some of the bigger bits of government, like the Cabinet Office, the Ministry of Justice, the Home Office, and the Department for Levelling Up, Housing Communities, and also some of the smaller parts of government, like the National Career Service, the Food Standards Agency, Land Registry, and the Government Legal Department. So I've worked in a number of different...
Chris, it might have been... Sorry to interrupt. It might have been easier to say which bits of public sector you haven't been in.
That might be the way forward, actually. Just that those bullets are growing all of the time. But and I've worked in a range of different roles in those organisations. So I've worked as and supported them as a product owner, as a service designer, as a user researcher, in kind of agile and user-centric leadership roles, and also through training, coaching, and mentoring. And in terms of my kind of experience of customer centricity and agile, I got my first, real first-hand experience about 8 years ago, when, as a civil servant, I was asked to be the operational subject matter expert in a new multidisciplinary team at the Valuation Office Agency. And in that role, I saw this team take an apparently immovable problem, so a problem that I'd observed in working in that organisation for 10 years. I saw that team solve that problem within 6 months, and that for me was really powerful. And since then I've not really looked back, and have obviously ventured further into the user-centered, customer-centered agile ways of working.
Fantastic, Chris. Thank you very much. And I think any business case that takes a problem from 10 years to 6 months is worth looking at really closely. So it's great to have you on the panel today, and thank you very much for joining us. So also like to introduce you to Iwona Winiarska. Iwona, I hope I've got the pronunciations correct this time round. Iwona was on a podcast and vlog that we did, I think it was last month or the month before, which actually kind of created this topic that Certs had put together. So I know something about Iwona that she might not mention in her intro, and that's that she was a finalist in the 2020 Women in Technology Awards. So I thought I'd say that up front to save your embarrassment. But it's great to have you on board, Iwona. What's your kind of interest and background in customer-centric Agile for those folks who didn't catch the previous episodes?
Thank you, John. And it's really great to be here. So yes, we did a podcast. So my role involves mainly digital transformation. So I work as an agile coach, delivery consultant, mainly leading agile and also DevOps transformation programs. I started my journey in the private sector, working with different digital agencies, and then gradually I moved into public sector, working also in the cabinet office, and then a range of different government departments and the agencies. My role definitely includes helping organizations and teams improve ways of working, but then also apply customer-centric approach. And I help them with all of that so that they can achieve their desired outcomes. And in terms of customer-centric agile, so I started my journey, I think, more or less at the time when I also started learning more about agile approaches. And that was also actually around 8 years ago. So since that time, I completely changed my worldview, which is more about considering users or customers at everything that I do in my day-to-day role, no matter if I work on a digital service, on a transformation program, or even within the DevOps environment, where normally we consider customers as our developers or internal users. So I think that approach has helped me really to understand the essence of best practice and how we can best achieve our outcomes in the most efficient way.
Cool. Thanks, Iwona. Right. So some folks on the call will have a view of what customer-centric agile is, and I think in both of your introductions you've kind of alluded to some elements of it. But this is normally quite a hard question to answer because it's kind of trying to boil it down into a bit more of a sort of the essence or the summary. So, Chris, I'm going to come to you first, but if you were to sort of say, let's define the key components of customer-centric agile and what its key principles are. You don't have to do all of them. You could do the top three or something. But for you, in your experience, what are those? What is it, and what are the key principles, please?
So, as you mentioned, John, sometimes this sort of definition can be a bit tricky. So, for me, in terms of my mental model and how I learned about customer centricity and agile, it was really about understanding the difference between that and what I was used to, or essentially understanding what it wasn't. So, at least in my way of seeing it, traditionally in project or software delivery, we'll plan like project timelines and milestones and budget and capture business or organization requirements. We'll prioritize them, we'll deliver against them, and then we do some kind of user acceptance testing before the end and before we close down the project and we implement whatever the thing is that we're implementing, which is quite a linear, sequential approach. And which is great because it can make it relatively simple to track progress and kind of track delivery and spend. So in contrast, when we deliver projects or software or services in a customer-centric agile way, we put the needs of the end users, often in the public sector, those people are members of the public, so citizens, we put them at the heart of the decisions that we make about the solution. And those needs of users, of our customers, they stay there at the center of everything that we do throughout the delivery process. And because it's an agile thing, we do this in an agile way. We have a more kind of cyclical approach to delivery rather than, as I described earlier, that more linear approach. So those cycles, that cyclical approach, these cycles are often called sprints. And in the public sector, like we often do these like every 2 weeks. So we go through these really rapid cycles of delivery rather than these kind of big chunks of delivery phases kind of put on the end of each other. And when we put end users or our customers at the center of what we do, we start with user research and understanding the needs of our users. And when I say start, as I said, I don't mean the start of the project or the start of the work. I mean at the start of every single cycle that we do. And once we've understood our users' needs, or better understood our users' needs, we define small problems that we need to solve based on that research, and we come up with a range of ways that we might solve those problems, and prototype some solutions, and then test them with real people before starting that cycle all over again. So for me, the key to this is this kind of incremental iteration of the solution or of our intended solution. and pivoting away from that, or pivoting in part of that if we need to. And we do that all of the time, and we do it again and again and again. And that kind of make, test, learn cycle means that we can test our assumptions and our hypotheses about what will work and what won't work. So the further we go, the more confident we become that our intended solution will work. So I guess that was a bit waffly, but in a nutshell, I guess it's a way to de-risk what we're doing. It's about gaining greater confidence through continually making, testing, and iterating.
Cool. So again, Iwona, it's a personal interpretation, yeah. So it's not the encyclopedic answer. It's a kind of what's real for you in your experience. But if you had the same question, which is what's the core definition of customer-centric agile and some key principles, what would you bring out?
I agree with everything what Chris said. For me, my definition would be that it's considering our customers always at the heart of everything we do. That's in a nutshell what I understand, and what in practice what it looks like. It's very often starting with discovery, so that we can learn about our customers. We can collaborate them or even co-create them, different solutions that we might want to test in the next stage. In the government, again, we call that stage alpha, where we prototype, experiment, where we try to see what works, what doesn't, where we can actually learn from user feedback. And I think what's important when you ask about principles, for me, early feedback is key. If we know early enough that a customer wants a certain feature, or this is the current experience they have, I think it's very easy to change things. So I definitely agree with that, our ambition to de-risk delivery so that we don't produce or create a solution that wouldn't be fit for purpose. And then it's actually, for me, again, working with our customers on a day-to-day basis, sometimes even, and involving them in the decision-making process so that they actually create the user journey or that customer journey themselves. So it's very close collaboration, it's co-creation, it's letting them decide how they want that journey to be actually designed for them. And through different methods or techniques and user research as a very big or important part of it, we can learn a lot about our customers and design our services and products in the way that are really targeting their hearts and minds. So this is, for me, I think, collaboration, co-creation, early feedback, really important when working with our customers.
Cool. And so I just thought of a question off the back of what both of you were saying. So we have a lot of the audience and the interests in this particular series do come from public sector. And I think this was a topic, Iwona, that we discussed on the last episode. But when you say customer in the public sector, who are we actually referring to? So I'm just going to, I think I led the last question with Chris, so I'm going to ask Iwona that question first and then Chris to follow. So in the public sector, who is the customer, Iwona?
That's a very good question. And I know that very often we talk interchangeably when we talk about customers and users, and sometimes when we hear, like what I say is I talk about users quite a lot because that's the language that we use in the public sector. So a customer are just citizens, residents, users of public services, digital services of the central or local government. So I think the principle stays the same. It's just the difference is that they don't actually have any choice to use a different service. When you apply for a passport, you can't decide to go to a different partner provider and have your passport done. So that's why we call customers users in that context.
Great, thanks. And Chris, same question. The distinction, are the different types of customers unique to the public sector?
So unsurprisingly, perhaps I agree with everything Iwona you've said. I think from a service design perspective, where we think about the service we're creating or designing or delivering. Often there will be external facing aspects of that. So that will be a form on a website somewhere someone will use to apply for a passport in that example, which that those people will be typically be citizens. But there are also sometimes some elements of that service that are internal facing. So essentially, how does the organization see that application or that completed form once it comes in? Depending on the nature of that kind of that service or the solution that we see internally, I think sometimes it can be appropriate to consider internal users as customers, but in doing that, we're thinking about the people that are pressing buttons on things to make things happen, not necessarily the kind of, I guess, like Prince 2 definition of a customer, which some people might be familiar with, and thinking about kind of almost like from a stakeholder perspective. So for me, anyone who has a direct interaction with the service that we're designing or the thing that we're creating can and often should be considered as a customer when we're thinking about customers' needs and users' needs.
So another sort of unscripted question that I've just been thinking of. So if we went down we're still using Agile, but we're not doing so much customer-centric, and I appear as your customer, and I really confidently hand you a document, these are the requirements, that kind of, I suppose that might be a bit of a red flag. How do you guys manage me to say, look, I know what I want, I've got them in requirements, whereas I'm thinking that if I go through the process that you guys are both describing, I might actually discover some things that I didn't realize, and I might have thought I wanted this but actually needed the following. I might have been looking at symptoms rather than root cause. I'm just wondering how you kind of navigate that, because that's a general challenge with introducing any kind of iterative process. So that's kind of like an Agile challenge, isn't it? But I think also you're introducing Agile, and you're also doing the kind of discovery. Jon, this is actually what you need. You thought you needed this. Does that ring true at all? I don't even know if that's a scenario you face, but I just sort of thought that might be something that happens.
Yeah, if I can respond to that first,
Chris.
Yeah. Absolutely, Jon. And depending on I'm not a big fan of the term kind of maturity, but depending on how experienced that organisation is in working in an agile or customer-centred way, it can depend on kind of how receptive they are to this way of working. And so it certainly isn't uncommon from my experience for stakeholders to provide a kind of a list of things or a list of kind of requirements essentially. Now, rather than having that battle, if that's the right term, but rather than trying to kind of have that battle right from the start, as part of a kind of an early introduction to Agile and customer centricity, one way that we can, and I've had personal experience, success in doing this, is framing the things that that stakeholder or the organisation is giving the team, framing those as hypotheses. So we can hypothesize that if we do what Mr. or Miss or Mrs. stakeholder, what you're asking us to do, if we do this, then this will happen. And we can test that through user research. So, and we can allow our users to essentially make the case or make the argument on our behalf. So if we think that something won't work, but a stakeholder is pretty wedded to it, is pretty kind of committed to it, then that's okay. We can hypothesize that something will or won't work, and we'll take it out and test it. And we involve stakeholders and we involve people in the playback of that research. So when we learn whether or not that hypothesis has been proven or disproven, we involve them in that. So essentially, we allow our customers or our user research to essentially define what we should do and to prove or disprove that hypothesis, rather than essentially having an exchange of opinions.
Thanks, Chris. So, Iwona, I'm just thinking in the scenario Chris has just described, that's a much more mature relationship that you've got with the folks that you're working for. And if anyone's heard a team ever say, well, that's what we were told, we implemented, what we were told to implement, that kind of, that almost that separation that sometimes exists between the business need and the technology need, you're actually doing the opposite, aren't you? You're kind of actively testing and guiding and probing what the user or the customer experience is, or the customer requirement is. You're not kind of just taking the requirements and then running with them and then coming back later. So does what Chris described, does that ring true in your experience? Iwona, have you got any other examples? Do you have any examples of any folks that you've kind of talked through from that kind of old school approach to having being open to this kind of way of working?
Yes, definitely it does resonate with me. Working with hypotheses, assumptions that we have about a product or a thing that we're trying to build makes sense, and this is necessary to make sure that we are right in our approach. I think if I may be a little bit controversial, starting like with the whole agile movement, I think the only exception that I can imagine where I would just take that brief and I would deliver it is in cases like when we've done this before. So, for example, if there is a product or service that we're building for the first time, that's not appropriate just to consider the specification or that brief as final. But if we've been delivering for that client many years and we do kind of the same thing all over again, that brief or specification will be right because we've done it before. There shouldn't be any surprises. So it's the kind of within, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Dave Snowden's framework about 4 different domains of complexity. So if this work is relatively simple, we've done it before, there are no questions, then I wouldn't mind actually just delivering it. But the problem here is that in technology, in the environment where we work, in the public sector or private, usually we work in a very complex environment. So what that means is that we need to actually find out what the outcomes will be, what that customer journey will be, and therefore we need to include customers in that design process and development process as well. And therefore, starting with user research, hypothesizing, making assumptions so that we can validate if the brief or that specification is right or not. So in practice, what I like doing is just asking questions like why? Why do you need this? Or what goal are you trying to achieve? Why is that going to be helpful? Or how customers are going to benefit from that solution? And why can very often uncover things that perhaps we were aware of, but very often we might not be aware of. And this is, I think, our learning that we should definitely include in our design process.
Great answers and insights from both of you. So another question that's popped into my mind is that the customer and this new way of working, if it is encountered for the first time, it's new. So they go on a journey. What about the folks who have been successful in sort of agile delivery, but they've never done customer-centric? They've got so you guys, I'm sure, when you're working with your teams, you also act as coaches for your own teams. So, talk us through some of the challenges people face, sort of adapting to this as a member of the Scrum or of the delivery team. Do you find that folks are kind of very nervous about having that much interaction with the business, or is there some skills, soft skills that need to be learnt, or do people just actually, just fall into it and it's a very easy transition? So perhaps I'll ask Chris that question first, just in terms of sharing out the questions. But have you experienced that? Do you have, what does it take to kind of adapt to this way of working?
So I think if you're working with a team that is already familiar and bought into the agile way of working, that's a much stronger start, as it were, in implementing kind of user or customer centricity than if you're trying to do the whole lot. So that's a positive for the start. I think that the key difference is the potential uncertainty around what we're going to develop or deliver. If we're using just an agile approach, but we already have all of the kind of essentially the requirements or the needs have been identified early on, then it's really just a case of chunking the way of delivering that I talked about earlier that agile isn't it just turns waterfall into much smaller waterfalls, right? Whereas introducing customer centricity into this means that we know we're going to be working in these cycles, but what we don't know is the next cycle explicitly necessarily what we're going to be working on, and certainly not the one after that or the one after that. So I think the introduction of customer centricity can be difficult for some people who feel that they kind of really want to understand what they're going to be working on the sprint after next and the sprint after that. I think to help to kind of I guess help soften the impact of that, what we can say is that everything that we're doing and the reason we're testing things with users is essentially so that we can experiment. And so if we try something, if we identify a problem that we want to solve, we go through essentially the design process. So we ideate and we come up with a prototype and we test that. And the thing that we thought would happen doesn't, that's absolutely okay. And kind of giving people and giving teams the kind of the space to fail, if we term that as a failure, is really important, because that is essentially how we learn. And it means that when we do deliver the thing eventually, or when we do deliver the product, we know, again, as I talked about earlier, we can have greater confidence that it will meet users' needs and people will actually be able to use it. Instead of using phone or post or email or whatever channels they might use, we can be confident people will actually use it, rather than be confident we can deliver something and not really know whether it will meet people's needs.
Got it. So, I mean, in summary, I think you're selling the benefits of that approach to those folks who haven't used it before, to give them the kind of the confidence to embrace it. Iwona, have you had experience of folks who have kind of rejected this as an approach, or been very worried, or just feel in a relatively new teams, or how you introduce folks? Again, I'm just thinking there might be folks on the webinar now or watching it on playback which might think, well, we've never done this before. What makes them nervous and what sort of calms their nerves?
Definitely, I've been in that situation before, and it's not easy. And I've heard that, like, we've never done this before, or someone saying, especially when Chris said that we have external and internal customers of even the same service, I've heard some developers saying, like, we don't have any customers, because very often people think about customers as the end customers using that product or service, and not internal staff or employees within our organizations. So I think, again, it's I wouldn't try to imply that approach to tell people what to do or how to do it, because this may discourage them to take any efforts or attempts to actually try to think differently. But it's important to start doing things differently. It's important to consider customers of the product that they're building, and there are, I think, different ways how we can approach that. So first of all, we need to just try it. We need to experiment with that. And the way how we can do that is to encourage the team to try and learn. If it works, that's great. If it doesn't, we won't do it again. And I'm saying this purposely because 99.9% this will work out, and this will prove as very valuable learning about our customers, why we should involve customers in our development process. The other way, I think, how we could approach that is just doing very short design sprints, which are not really that much time consuming, as opposed to building the product based on the needs that are not validated or tested beforehand. So during a design sprint, you just have a few days to understand the customer problem, then try to ideate and think about different ideas, how we could solve them, how might we improve our customer experience, and then we try to sketch something and think about it as a possible solution. Usually an exercise like this that takes 5 days, it can be even shorter, is a really great way how to, first of all, engage people in your team, how to show them like a different way of working so that they can really put themselves into their customer shoes, and also try to have some empathy. So I think these techniques work really well, but definitely if an organization is already using agile ways of working and they are familiar with the user experience concepts, the journey is much easier, because when we need to deliver something, usually there's not time to actually think about the whole kind of structure or approach beforehand. So that's why I think it's good to have already that put in place.
Cool. And maybe I can throw something in as a technology leader of sorts, and that's the concept of psychological safety. So, Chris, you used the F word, the fail word, and in some cultures, business cultures, it's a really it's a really bold statement to mention failing. And I've heard people turn that into learn fast instead of fail fast and all the rest of it. But I don't think we should shy away from talking about failing fast. But I think the key thing is that as leaders, we create this safe environment, the first amongst equals, we can all speak freely. And they call it psychological safety so that folks actually feel free to say, actually, I think we might be going in the wrong direction. You never have an environment where people say, whatever you do, don't mention XYZ to John. Do you understand that kind of, that's your leadership, that's your job as leader, to create that, not just within the team, but maybe between the team and the business as well. And that everyone, to a certain extent, suffers from this psychological safety. For example, on this call, it takes a while for people to ask questions, which is a nice segue, because Rebecca and Zoe have both posted in some questions. So what I'll do is I shall just do them in the order they've arrived. So first thing is, thank you very much, Rebecca and Zoe, for your questions. So the first question from Rebecca is, my organisation has taken big steps recently in customer/user engagement, and she's got the role of project manager, very confident with our approach, but customer users have had mixed experiences in the past, and some are slow to trust the process. So any tips on anyone attending, or we'll go to the panel first, on how you can get your customers and users to have greater trust in the process? Iwona, would you like to go first on that one, and then I'll come to Chris?
Sure. It's a very interesting question. I think I would like to understand, if I were on that team working with Rebecca, I would like to understand, why do customers have this type of experience? And it's been mentioned that they have mixed experience in the past. So I would definitely deep dive into that, because it's, again, valuable learning for us to understand what your customer has gone through and what are the experiences. It's a part of UX that we need to understand first who the customers are, and then what is the current customer experience with something that perhaps is causing a lot of problem, a lot of pain in the day-to-day life. Is something that, sometimes they might not even want to talk about it. But that's, again, I think, as UX practitioners, it's for us to understand why. Starting with why again. I'm gonna quote Simon Sinek, and I think he created Start With Why. So having that insight would help us design an approach for that particular customer, how we can work with them so that we don't repeat the same mistakes all over again. I'm not sure if that was like a partner or just experience with UX, but definitely I would try to deep dive into it and understand why they say what they think.
Fantastic, thanks. Chris, we lost you there briefly, and I think you're back now. Just to quickly recap, so we're answering Rebecca's question, which is just a very quick summary, which is how can we get our customer and users who've had a mixed experience with this kind of approach in the past, and they're slow to trust the process. So how do you bring people on to support this as an overall approach?
So I think everything that Iwona talks about would go a long way toward building that trust or understanding the issues that have led to that kind of distrust or uncertainty about the process. I think taking that a step further, often we think about our engagement with customers or our engagement with users. We think about it purely from a user research or like usability testing perspective. I think where we can, if we can involve our customers in other elements of the design process, so involve customers in the problem definition. So how getting customers involved in defining the problems that we've identified through our research, and involved in through kind of co-creation type activities in designing or thinking about what the solution might look like, or what we could do to solve those problems. I think the more exposure that people have, and this goes for kind of stakeholders in the organization as well as customers and users, but the more exposure that people have to the process, and the more that they feel that they are not only they're aware and understand the process, but if they're able to influence that process in any way, shape, or form, then I think their confidence in it can only improve.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. And so, Rebecca, I hope that's a good answer for you, and for folks listening, it's a really good question. Now, I think Zoe's got an excellent question as well, and it's another angle, but it's a really good question. So I'll read this out for the recording. Understand the importance of involving the customer, Zoe says, but how do you balance the customer needs against the organization's needs? The customer, I love this phrase, the customer wants clouds and rainbows, but we might not have the budget to produce that. And before you guys answer it, I suppose this is also a little bit in the product manager space as well, where you're sort of you're looking at something over a slightly longer term. But it's really interesting that Zoe's looking at that potential conflict between the customer's needs and what the organisation needs. So I'll just do it in the same order as we've done before. So Iwona, if you want to give us your thoughts, and then I'll come across to Chris.
Sure. I think I really love that question, because personally, although I've been working in very customer-centric environments, sometimes we do only talk about customer needs, and I've observed that some people don't, or they just tend to forget to consider the business needs or organizational needs, which are equally important. It might be the budget, it might be our internal goals and outcomes we're trying to achieve, and obviously we need to be profitable. So yes, it's a very difficult question, but the answer is very simple. I think it's about finding the right balance, which is not easy to do, but definitely considering what are the customer needs, and then also what we're trying to achieve, linking this with these outcomes or our strategy about a certain product or service, or it can be anything that you're working on, and seeing how we can make this work together. So the way how this can be done is that obviously customers cannot have everything they ask for, so we would need to prioritize. So what is the most valuable for your customer, or what is the area that is causing the most pain? And then based on that, you can again try and use maybe different methods, like analyzing what is the value and impact, as opposed to like the risk if you didn't do that, what your customer is asking for. That would demonstrate what are the key areas that it's really worth investing in. And instead of having like 10 different items on the customer list, I'm calling it a shopping list, you just decide, okay, so based on the activities that we were talking about before, like user research, user testing, or even engaging with customer, it doesn't need to be any structured approach, but even sometimes informal or ad hoc conversations can help you understand what is that kind of minimum viable product for them to be able to say that, yes, we are happy with that. And the shopping list is gradually getting smaller, and you have like 3 important things which is easier to invest in rather than having the whole shopping list. So sometimes it's like if you go shopping to a supermarket, you just need to decide, what do you really need to be able to make dinner. Or it's just really just finding that balance, what would give the most value, I think.
Cool. Thanks, Iwona. Chris had a bit of time to think about that question, but the balancing of the customer wants, and the organisation. So it's customer needs and the organisational needs. How do you make that balance?
I think that the term kind of user wants or customer wants and needs, that the wants and needs bit is often used quite interchangeably, and I think that's actually a critical part of this. It's not unusual through either research, through interviews, or just from usability testing or other types of research activity that we'll hear customers say, "Oh, I want a button here, or I want this color, or I want to be able to do this thing in this." It's really important through our research that we dive into that and understand what's the fundamental need that drives the kind of the solution that's in the customer's minds. In this instance, clouds and rainbows. Like, what is it? What do they what problem do they think the clouds and rainbows will help them solve? What is it that they need? But beyond that, very similar to what Iwona said. Really, it's then about prioritizing and understanding what the minimum viable product is. What's the minimum that the thing needs to do in order to be viable for the user?
Okay, and so I think if there's any marketeers listening, they probably would have been screaming out wants versus needs. As that kind of everyone has infinite wants, but you turn those into needs, you have a smaller subset, and you can always sell a need because people will tend to put their hands in their pocket for a need. I think the other sort of business strategy point, if you take a step back, is that ultimately the organizational goals need to be aligned with your customers for kind of long-term success. But I know that wasn't really the spirit of the question. I think Zoe was asking more about the sort of the short-term trade-off. What do you do next? And in that kind of sense. So I can't believe the time. So we've actually got 4 minutes left, and I've got more questions that we're going to be able to get through in 4 minutes. So that might leave us wanting more at a later stage, but I'll try and prioritise those. But before I do so, Zoe, thank you very much for the question. That was a great question as well. So first one was, rather the next one is, how do you measure success? If you're gonna actually sort of, this is the old saying, if you can't measure it, can't manage it. You're gonna prove it to maybe someone that this works. What's your, what do you really? How do you say, yeah, this has been a success? So I'll switch things around a bit and go to Chris first, and then Iwona. So Chris, how do we measure it?
So I'll be brief because I know we've not got long left. So for me, I think there are kind of like almost two sets of metrics here. There's one around how the team's working and whether we are working in a customer-centric and agile way. And the way we can measure that is essentially through comparing the way we're working to the service standard. So as some of the audience might be aware, the most services that are created, certainly digital services that are created in central government, are assessed against the service standard, and there are some really key points in there that we should follow. So there's some kind of like published like best practice that we should be following there, and we can compare whether we're doing what we should be doing. And in terms of outcomes of the things that we're creating and the services we're delivering, those performance measures really should be aligned with what the service is trying to achieve, like its goals and objectives. There's some pretty common ones. So general measures like customer satisfaction. So essentially how satisfied our customers are with the thing that we provided, which we can do through surveys. Completion rates. So essentially, are people actually doing what they want to do, what they need to do in this service, or are they dropping out partway through for some reason? And things like which we measure through performance analytics, and even like things like time that people are spending on different pages or different parts of the service can give us some insight as to how well the service is performing. And then there's some outcomes that might be, or some measures that might be specific to the thing that we're delivering. So just as a final example, if the service is aiming to reduce reliance that customers have on using phone or post or email to give us all information, then we should measure kind of the volume of information that's coming in via those channels compared to the digital service, and over time look to scale up or increase the use of digital in that instance.
Thanks, Chris. Iwona, I'm going to ask you a final question, a different question, just because of time. I'm sure you would have added a few elements onto there, and you're more than welcome to add some additional ones. But the question I was going to ask you to help us close, which was, if the folks listening want to kind of go for this, actually, this sounds really interesting. This sounds like something that we should explore. what would your advice be to get them started? What should they do immediately after this webinar?
I think it's a great journey if you consider your customers in anything that you do, and no matter what role, what job you have, what you do on a day-to-day basis, or how senior you are, try to think about people who are receiving your services or your products. And there are a lot of great, I'm sure, training, certifications, but I do really encourage everyone to actually talk to other people and see other case studies, how it worked in their context, in their organizations, how they adopted customer-centric agile, and how the journey is going, because there is, I'm sure, a lot of learning. And for me, again, it's like something which is quite addictive when you start learning about your customer and learning how much you didn't know and what you've learned, or even sometimes how wrong you've been about your customer. This is really an eye-opening exercise that can change not just the product or service that you're building, but actually your worldview about things and how they work and how to actually successful in it.
Your whole general direction could change because of that insight.
Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, Iwona and Chris, massive thank you for joining us in your lunch breaks, and also to Rebecca and Zoe for great questions, and everyone else that's listening. I know with these things on a Friday afternoon, we need to try and keep to time because people have meetings, and we've gone a minute over, which is my fault. But that's because we've had such interesting stuff to talk about. So, final thank you to Iwona and Chris. I hope you all enjoyed it. It will be available on a replay if you need to forward a link to a friend or colleague to spread the word. But happy Friday. Have a great weekend when it finally arrives for everyone. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.